Mr. Chairman, and thank the ranking member for having this hearing. Very interesting, and it's interesting. I'm just going to kind of start on where Senator Cantwell left off, and that is the fraud on the unemployment compensation. We just had, I'm from West Virginia, we just had an instance where our unemployment commissioner basically said that somebody from the same IP address had applied for 50,000 different ways to get a benefit with, different names or tweaking different names. And I'm wondering, Attorney General Schmidt, you mentioned that this is an issue that's come up in Kansas, but I'm wondering, is it the magnitude of which we're seeing? And also, what additional resources would you need to combat something of this nature when a program is created this rapidly, but also to the great benefit of so many people?
Senator, from the vantage point of the Kansas Attorney General's office, we haven't seen that scope, but I'm quick to say we might not because, as I was just describing to Senator Cantwell, we aren't necessarily the face of the public response. Mm-hmm. The only thing I might add, it's something we have talked and thought about a bit here because we've seen the reports in other states that the problems have been widespread, and I don't have a reason to think that Kansas is materially different. I just have not seen the data.
Right.
But, there are other programs where there is a federal-state partnership, as there is now with the unemployment payments coming from the federal government to assist in extended benefits. Medicaid program comes to mind. And in some of those programs, Congress has seen fit to create certain requirements for fraud policing by the state in order to participate in the program. For example, the Medicaid fraud control units that I mentioned earlier. So I'm not prepared to advocate that in the unemployment insurance context, but it does seem to me a logical area to look, whether that model for programs that have shared funding would also make sense in the unemployment context for shared fraud enforcement.
I mean, I think a lot of our systems are very overwhelmed, as you know, and to try to determine where the fraud lies and how to detect it, I think is an issue. I'm going to stick with you, Mr. Attorney General, because I want to ask something that comes up in this committee all the time that has to be related to scams and certainly the education of either our elderly or others. And I appreciate Senator Klobuchar bringing up the scamming of the elderly. That's an issue I'm very concerned about in all aspects. But, we have a lack of broadband in our rural areas. And what do you find is the best way to really transmit to people who may not have broadband connectivity the possibility of false advertising or false claims or, cures that are going to cure it all or prevent you from ever getting COVID? How do you address that issue in Kansas?
So we are the lead consumer protection agency for the state at the state level in Kansas. And because of that, in ordinary times, we have a very robust consumer education and prevention program. We do it online, as you suggest. We also do a lot of in-person presentations around the state, whether it's civic clubs, nursing homes, senior centers. Our people spend a large proportion of their time actually talking with Kansans because our philosophy is if we can help you avoid losing your money in the first place, it's better for you, it's better for us, so we can focus our enforcement on the back end on a smaller universe. Right. So that's how we normally do it. Now, as your question, I think, implies, right now, where we're all less mobile, we're doing things like we're doing today and communicating remotely. Obviously, that disables one of our principal tools for reaching Kansans, which is go where they are in person and talk with them. And so we've struggled with that. We are doing more online. We recognize the limits, as you suggest, that there are areas that's simply not going to be effective because our consumers aren't able to access that programming. But nonetheless, we think there is a significant number of Kansans who we don't normally reach online. We could reach online. Technologically, they're able. And so we're doing that now because it's better than not doing anything. So we've pushed that. But I have struggled very much with how we reach those pockets of individuals in the state that we can't reach digitally because they don't have suitable internet access. And we can't reach them physically right now because of right. COVID-related restrictions. And I don't have a good answer right now.
Yeah, and I think that's a real problem because a lot of those are our more vulnerable populations. And I think it brings a difficult question. I don't know if I have any more time. I got one more question to Mr. Smith, we've seen a big increase in scams, obviously, and they're heading towards the vulnerable population, which we've said. But what limitations to the FTC, this is to my FTC, let's see, yeah, Mr. Smith. What limitations does the FTC have? And I've created an act with Senator Gardner called the CEASE Act, which would increase penalties for false advertising and deceptive acts. Wondering if that would be a helpful tool, if you're aware of it, and what tools, additional tools you might need at the FTC to be able to break up these large advertising scams that we see.
Right, so I am familiar with the CEASE Act, and I think we may have provided some technical assistance
Yes.
to your offices, and we're happy to continue working with your office on that law. And with respect to specific tools that we could use, I mentioned earlier reauthorizing the Safe Web Act. I think Senators Moran and Blumenthal have co-sponsored a bill that would reauthorize the Safe Web Act. That's critically important for our foreign law enforcement. And some of these COVID scams are coming from outside of the country. The second thing is to clarify our authority under Section 13B of the FTC Act. So for decades and decades, we've had authority to obtain equitable monetary relief under Section 13B, and just recently there's been one important court, the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, which has called into question that authority. That issue is now in front of the Supreme Court. It will probably be resolved sometime next year about this time. But in the meantime, it would be great if Congress could act to clarify our authority that we can get redress, restitution, disgorgement, as Congress has thought we've been able to get for the last, probably 40 years.